format. And the method of my late father always works to get the message out to the masses and get the supporters on board. When executed meticulously and thoughtfully, it is powerful enough to initiate dramatic change and make it really happen. Obama has learned his lessons in Chicago well. I am proud to see that my late father's model for organizing revolutionary activity is being applied successfully beyond local community organizing to affect the entire national campaign of 2008. It is a fine tribute to Saul Alinsky as we approach the anniversary of his 100th birthday. Bell David Alinsky, Medfield, Massachusetts. Need I say more? Is that an answer to your question?
Well, that's the beginning of it.
We only have a week to go. But I've written on this, and obviously it has not been printed.
There is a quote, though, from Obama, direct quote. Back in 2001, unfortunately,
it's the redistribution of wealth quote. You can look it up on the web.
It ties in with the direct forward statements on the Constitution and how it has to be revised.
Well, Saul Alinsky.
Great judges in there. And
where do you think he got that? Saul Alinsky.
Saul Alinsky.
Right. Next question. I've sobered you up, I know. Yes.
John, what do you think are the chances that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac can be put in the perspective for which they were originally intended and held in
Zero.
check? Zero.
Zero. We already are seeing the bailout that's being directed to the banks, Barney Frank and Chris Dodd and others saying, well, this can't go to just any credit companies. Can't make just any loans. We have to have politically correct loans. Look, both parties were responsible for the Fannie Mae Freddie Mae mess. Fannie Mae Freddie Mac mess. Both parties were responsible. But I have to tell you, we had warning signals, and there were some brave people who deserves credit. Tom Feeney down in Orlando was one of them who warned against it. There's some others. There are even some brave Democrats like Jim Cooper of Tennessee who warned against it. We were all seduced by the fact that we thought these were sound institutions. Well, they were. Unfortunately, they had private profits, politically connected leaders. Everybody knew that Frank Williams was not the world's greatest budget chief and Jim Johnson was not the world's greatest lawyer, but they were politically connected. That's how they got their jobs. And we had the taxpayer holding the bag on the bill. It was a recipe for disaster. In economics, we call it moral hazard. Unfortunately, the bailout bill that we passed on Fannie Mae Freddie Mac had very few reforms. So I think we're chastened, but I worry for after this generation, which will remember this collapse, that we may ultimately repeat that mistake again. Remember, it's only been 20 years since the savings and loan disaster, which was all born out of the fact that we tripled the deposit insurance in the late night conference committee in Congress, I think in an inappropriate way. The savings and loan disaster was only 20 years ago. We barely remember it. Next question. Yes?
To me, one of the more powerful editorials you run in the journal was filed, I think, about a week ago, called The Liberal Supermajority, which wrapped up the package of the House. How do you think, if you assume Obama is elected, how will we look 3 to 4 years out?
Well, first of all, I don't think this election is over, and I'll tell you why. Obama's lead is 6 or 7 points. That's a real lead. But Republican presidential candidates have a habit of closing fast. Dole was 14 points down at this point in the 96 campaign. He lost by 8. Bush Sr. in 92 was down 11 points. He lost by 5.5. If there is a similar shift, this could be a close election. And that's why my book is relevant, because if we have a close election, I can guarantee you the lawyers are going to dispute it, one way or the other. On the Senate, I think it'll be 5 or 6 seats lost. I think there should be concern if one is a Republican about 9 seats going, but I don't see that today. Incumbents tend to win, and most of the Republican seats are held by incumbents. If the Republicans get to 60 or get to 40 seats and they lose the filibuster-proof minority status, things like card check, which is the elimination of secret ballots for union elections, will be on the table. I think that's the most pernicious thing on the Obama agenda. I don't think it's something that he particularly likes or wants, but the unions that have backed him insist on it, because they feel it's the only way to preserve their dwindling clout in private sector unions. The public sector unions are doing fine. You've probably noticed every time they negotiate with the city. They seem to be doing fine, but the private sector unions continue to shrink, and they feel they need that organizing tool, getting rid of the secret ballot. That's what I would most worry about, and that would be in jeopardy.
Assume for a moment that
I wouldn't mind skipping a generation and going to younger people. Sarah Palin would be in the mix. I think she's gotten an awful press, some of it deserved, but most of it has just been, I think, bitterness and jealousy and, frankly, elitism. Secondly, Paul Ryan of Wisconsin, a big up-and-coming leader, ranking member of the budget. I'll tell you very simply. There used to be a difference. There will probably be a difference in the future. For all of John McCain's faults, he has always stood against the big spenders, and he has opposed earmarks. It's one of the hallmarks of his career. And he has always shown enough independence to go up against people like Ted Stevens. That's to his credit. What's the difference right now? Well, there's an old joke that Republicans who serve a long time in office are just like Democrats who serve a long time in office. They both want to take as much money from your wallet or purse as possible. It's just that Republicans feel guilty about it. I'll take one more, and then I'm going to be happy to sign your books. Any other last question? Yes, the lady.
What's your thought about the early voting? Because I'm concerned that there may be some monumental event between now and Election Day that would have changed.
You are very wise. We had some people vote early before the first presidential debate. Does that make sense? You know, imagine if you're in a jury. You know, a civil case has a jury. Well, that's important to the people involved in the case. What if, in the summation of the civil case, the jury said, we've heard enough, and walked out, and then rendered their decision? They didn't even wait for the closing arguments. Would we consider that fair and right? Well, in early voting, beyond a certain point, you're basically having people get up in the middle of the argument of the campaign and saying, we've heard enough. Now, early voting is better than absentee voting, which is much more prone to fraud. At least it's held in a government building. Although I noticed in the last election in 2004, many of the restrictions on campaign advertising and getting within 100 feet of the polls didn't apply to early voting. I hope you fix that. But I think we need to limit early voting a little bit because it's gotten out of hand. You know, the Constitution talks about election day. At some point, when you stretch things out, we no longer have election day, we have election month. And that's probably going too far. Thank you so much, and I'd be happy to meet you out there. One other thing. I remember Stan Marshall back in the late 80s, just after I joined the Journal, when he founded the James Madison Institute. I came to some of the early conferences, and I admit they were very small. But I have watched with pride and with growing respect what Stan and his successors have turned the James Madison Institute into. I do a lot of speaking. My job at the Journal is to cover state and local government. I know almost all the think tanks out there. James Madison is one of the three best think tanks in America. The other names can be available to you upon request, but I assure you, it's a tough competition. I'm from California, and the definition of a really good article is that it's such a good idea I should have written it, but I didn't. That